The lookout's warning averted a head-on, but the 48,000-ton ship sideswiped the iceberg, buckling the hull and opening seams along 300 feet of her starboard side. Titanic was designed with a series of watertight compartments separated by bulkheads. The ship could stay afloat with her 4 forward compartments flooded, but the iceberg opened 5 compartments to the sea, and Titanic was doomed. As flooding pulled the bow down, the stern was lifted out of the water. Tons of force from the unsupported stern flexed the ship, and finally broke its back. Still attached by the double keel, the flooded bow pulled the stern almost vertical before tearing itself free and going down like a torpedo, snapping the mast and tearing off the bridge. 10 minutes later, after a 2.5-mile fall, Titanic plowed into the ocean floor, embedding its bow 6 stories into hard clay. It's here that Cameron and his team will focus their exploration.
Okay, John, we are heading aft over the deck house right now, over the officers' quarters, heading for the grand staircase. All right, this is the grand staircase right here, coming up. And there it is. You're looking right down into the curve of the A deck level. Okay, Mission Control, we are starting bot ops. I'm just backing Gilligan out of his garage right now. His fiber optic tether is starting to pay out. Coming about, and okay, ready to roll. We're just about to head down the stairwell now, and we're going to go down actually 6 decks. Okay, just straight forward, right over the edge. That's it. Okay, got you. This was a beautiful carved oak staircase. It went down, we're on the boat deck level right now. It went down A deck, B deck, C deck, D deck, and down to E deck. This is our kind of main elevator that we use to get up and down through the ship. It really allows us to get to all the different deck levels on Titanic. So in a way, it's a blessing.
The fate of the grand staircase has always been a mystery. The centerpiece of the ship and perhaps Titanic's most opulent feature. Down this staircase, Titanic's wealthiest passengers, members of high society from Europe, America, and Canada, made their grand entrances to the dining room. This was the place to be seen.
Titanic's grand staircase was really, by far, in my opinion, the most dramatic, exquisite interior feature. It extended from the boat deck all the way down to F deck. The really elegant part of the staircase went from the boat deck to E deck. That's 6 decks. And it was made out of pale English oak and beautiful gilded wrought iron and bronze balustrades all the way down. It must have been really spectacular to stand at the boat deck and look all the way down to the E deck level there, down all those 6 decks. Of course, it certainly doesn't look like that today. It's all gone.
The fate of the grand staircase has always been a mystery. Initially, it was thought that it had collapsed into the heart of the ship, but there's no sign of it. There's still plenty of wood preserved in the wreck, so it's surprising that a structure this solid is no longer there.
You see, I think that the whole stairwell just lifted right out, the wooden stairs, leaving only the foundation. And these girders are just collapsed parts of the dome and so on from overhead that fell in when the ship hit the bottom. You'd have so much lift off that much wood and nothing holding it down because it was designed to be held in place, you know, more by gravity than anything. And we just stumbled upon that by accident when we were making the movie. And we sank our set and the staircase broke loose and floated up. It actually created a pretty dangerous condition because we were all in the set and suddenly this thing came roaring up underneath us. It was pretty wild.
In the meantime, I kind of want to ask Don if any of these survivors or if there are any reports of the grand staircase popping out in one piece.
Well, they're not necessarily one piece. Jack Thayer thought that he saw the bow of the ship come up out of the water, which we wonder now if that was maybe the staircase. And one of the survivors was found floating on a piece of staircase and he was picked up by a lifeboat. But he didn't say in his account how big a piece it was. And really, it couldn't have been too huge, I don't think, because it was just him and one other man on it. So at least there is some record of what we think is the staircase appearing, but nothing definitive.
Interesting. Well, it sure did leave a big hole, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
We're on the boat deck level. This is really interesting what's right in front of us. Here's another electric boat winch, just like the one on the other side. It's got a railing collapsed down over it. There was a guy on board, Colonel Archibald Gracie, and he tells a really amazing story of survival. He's one of these, there are 3 or 4 people who are our kind of black box recorders for what it was like in the last minutes of Titanic to be standing on her deck as the water kind of came up and just washed them away. And his story is pretty dramatic. He was on this deck and people came screaming and running aft, and as the ship started to plunge, the water came racing back across the deck, and he said it picked him up like a wave at the beach, and he reached up and he grabbed up the top of the deck house, right where we're looking right here, and this railing down below us was up on top of the deck house. It's fallen down, but he grabbed this railing and he held on to it, and he forgot to let go, and it actually, he was so freaked out by the moment that it pulled him underwater, and it actually dragged him down. And then he said he felt this huge suction drawing him down, and he was underwater for an endless time. And probably what that was is all of the water pouring down like a waterfall inside this grand staircase, and like a toilet bowl of the gods. And somehow he made it to the surface, and he managed to make it to Collapsible B. That's an overturned lifeboat, and he survived. And this is right where that happened. Yeah, and of course so many people didn't survive, but he's one of the few that did. And it seems like everybody that did survive who was actually aboard, who wasn't out safe in a lifeboat someplace, had an incredible story to tell. Hey John, what you're seeing here is actually Captain Smith's quarters, and this is his private bath. He was one of the best captains, most respected captains of the North Atlantic route. This was his retirement voyage. He was going to take the biggest ship in the world on her maiden voyage and just go out in a blaze of glory. And this is the kind of stateroom that he had. Here's his tub here. You see some of the faucets. Now the plumbing in here is kind of bizarre, isn't it, Ken?
There was a whole different system back then, especially for the captain. I mean, he had hot and cold fresh water and hot and cold salt water. So there was an arrangement there of 4 taps, which a lot of other first-class bathtubs didn't have. But you can also see his sink in the distance on the right. And
right
yeah,
that's the marble sink.
Mm-hmm.
So it's full of rusticles right now.
A little towel rack just below it, a little rod.
We've moved up to the bridge, and you can see that it's pretty devastated up here. You can see the corner, there's like a wooden baseboard there. That would have been the outline of the wheelhouse. As I come around here to the left, you can see us down below on the forward well deck. That's our light down there where the mirror is. Right in front of us is about the only thing that's still really recognizable on the bridge, and that's called the telemotor. I'll get in a little closer on that. What happened here was that as the ship plunged, as the bow section went down, it went down so fast. There, you can see our mirror now, just down below on the well deck. The ship went down so fast that the currents of water flowing over it snapped the guy wires that hold the mast, and it fell back and hit right here on the bridge, and it shattered the face of the wheelhouse, and the flow of water just tore it all off. So there's not a whole lot left here. It's very, very hard to imagine what this would have looked like. Maybe you guys have some images up there that you can show people what it might have looked like on the day. But there's something to me very eerie and I don't know, kind of moving about this one lone monument. The rest of the whole superstructure is just stripped away here, and the only thing remaining is this one monument. Here, I'll put a little light on it so you can see the natural color. And it's made out of bronze. The ship's wheel would have mounted right in that kind of little hole right there. And you know, Gilligan is now pretty much standing right where Quartermaster Hitchens was when he was standing at the ship's wheel, keeping a straight and steady course for New York. And he, you know, unexpectedly heard 3 sharp rings of the crow's nest bell, and that crow's nest would have been, you know, out there in the darkness someplace ahead of him from where you'd stand here on the bridge. And then when the crow's nest guys called, when Frederick Fleet called in, 6th Officer Moody would have answered the phone right over here against that wall. You know, what he heard was Frederick Fleet saying, "Iceberg right ahead."
Yes, what do you see?
Iceberg! Right ahead!
Thank you.
First Officer Murdoch, who was the officer of the watch, I don't think he waited for the telephone to ring when the crow's nest guys called the bridge. I think he already knew what was going on. I think he was already in motion. He would have come running in a door that was right over here, right where that big tangle of wires is. He would have run in and yelled, probably at the top of his lungs, at least I would have, "Hard to starboard." Hitchens says, "Hard to starboard eye," and he starts cranking that big old ship's wheel over. And boy, it was many turns. It was a lot of hard work for him to get that rudder hard over. And, you know, seconds counted so much. And, you know, Murdoch looked out front and saw an iceberg right square in their path. And he had to decide, do I go left or do I go right, you know? And it's not clear whether any decision would have been the right one at that point. I actually think Murdoch was a pretty cool guy. And I think he had a... He bore the burden of all that for the next, you know, 2 hours and 40 minutes of his life, which were the last moments of his life, and he gave his life trying to save people. When we were making the movie, I had a choice to make. I could do it historically correctly, or I could do what people would think was correct. In fact, it was historically correct for a hardest starboard order to the helmsman to turn the ship to port, to the left. That was just the way it was in those days. They were called tiller commands, and by starboarding the tiller, you ported the rudder and you turned to port. So the hardest starboard command actually turned the ship to port. So a lot of people thought they were pretty nautical and sent me a lot of letters. You can stop sending the letters. I'm trying to set the record straight right now. We did it right.
Hey, Jim, where exactly are you right now?
We are on the starboard boat deck, and we're looking aft. And what's in front of us right here is a davit, which of course was used to launch the lifeboats. And you can see the bronze lead screw there, and this little square thing on the right side that is where they would have put the crank handle in to crank the davit. And the thing that we found, these davits were made by the Welland Davit Company. And the thing that we found when we did the movie, because we had exact reproductions of them made by the Welland Davit Company from their old plans, is that it takes a lot of muscle power to crank these things out. And of course the boats were all launched by hand, the davits were operated by hand, and it took a long time. So this is an interesting davit, probably the most historically interesting site on the boat deck of the ship, because here's where First Officer William McMaster Murdoch, struggled so hard to launch not one, but 3 lifeboats off this same davit. He launched boat 1 about in the middle of the whole sinking crisis, and the boat went off with I think 12 people. And Don, how many could have fit in that lifeboat?
Lifeboat 1 had a capacity of 40 people, and in the end it left the ship with only 12 on board, only 5 of whom were passengers. Only 2 of those passengers were women, and primarily Sir Cosmo and Lady Duff Gordon and her secretary, Miss Francatelli. And of course there was the big debate about whether to go back, and I think the crewmen on board deferred to the peerage in the lifeboat, and whereas they of course felt that the crew were in charge. And so even though there was some debate about whether they should go back or not, nothing was ever done, and in the end, it looked like the Duff Gordons had sort of commandeered this lifeboat, and Sir Cosmo even paid each of the crewmen £5 just as a charity to get their lives together again afterwards, and it looked as if he'd bribed them. So of course afterwards, Sir Cosmo and Lady Duff Gordon, I think, were treated very harshly by the press and really by society in the long run. I think they suffered for this the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I know, it's really interesting. You know, I've always puzzled about that because, you know, Murdoch was a pretty amazing guy, and he was the first one to get boats launched off the ship. He had 2 or 3 of them in the water before the officers on the other side of the ship had any. Well, you know, the thing that's interesting is, you know, here Murdoch is struggling to get 3 boats launched on the same davit, and he's running back and forth. He's actually launching a bunch of boats, but just inboard of this davit, right here where we're looking at the deck, would have been another boat, which was a collapsible boat called Collapsible C. And that boat's interesting too because into that boat got J. Bruce Ismay. He was the owner of Titanic, and he was the one who probably influenced the captain to keep the pedal to the metal and to be going at full speed through a moonless night, through known ice fields. And, you know, here's a guy that jumped into one of the last boats to leave the ship and left 1,500 people on board to die, and that happened right here as well.
Now these lifeboats, guys, they were heavy, weren't they? I mean, they were really heavy, weren't they?
Yes, indeed they were. They were made of elm. It's quite a dense wood, and probably about 2 tons apiece, something along that line.
Jim, a lot of human drama played out right there, didn't it?
Well, yeah, you hit on an interesting thing because they get the first 2 boats in the water, right? And Murdoch comes over and he looks down this stairwell. It's pretty fallen away right now, but you can actually look down. Maybe I can do it right here. You can look down to the lower deck, which is the promenade deck. Right down this, there would have been stairs here. They're gone now. And he sees green water pouring up those steps. The ship has minutes to live before the water comes rushing over the deck. And over here, you can see the deck house is kind of collapsed, but up there on the roof was another lifeboat, that far away, and up on a roof with no lifting tackle, no way to get it down, no ramp, no thought given to how they were going to do that. Murdoch got a bunch of guys, went up on the roof, and I think just the adrenaline kicked in, and they just lifted it, shoved it to the edge, and they slid it down on some oars. And it's just an amazing scene, I think. Right down here on the deck, these people struggling so hard for their lives. And what he did was he cranked this davit back in, because you have to crank them out to lower the boat, and then you have to crank them back in to pick up the next one. So he cranked it back in a 3rd time, and that's just as far as they got before the water washed over them. And you can see that this davit is still in an upright position as opposed to cranked out. In my mind, it's a monument to Murdoch, to, you know, his crew, to the entire crew of Titanic that stayed at their posts, that sacrificed their lives. You know, it's in the movie. I made the point about the 3rd class people sort of not faring as well as 1st class. If you were a 3rd class male passenger, you stood about a 1 in 10 chance of surviving. And if you were a 1st class female passenger, it was 90%. So it was a big spread. And apparently, by all accounts, there was a near riot. You know, several hundred people who had realized that the last couple boats on the ship were all the way forward. And they came down and crowded around. The crew had to link arms, pass the women through, and apparently it got pretty violent. The officers had to fire their guns and so on. But the crew did the worst of all. I think, Don, do you remember how many crew members there were on board and how many died?
Well, I think there were about 900 crew members, and off the top of my head, I think there were about 700 of them who passed away.
Pause! Do you see any moving? Check the main shore.
These are dead, sir.